Today I'm going to share with you a few lessons learned after running our AppSec program for about 8 years now, and how we tackled a few of the issues that we identified along the way. The lessons learned are mostly applicable to large to medium-sized companies, but regardless of the size of your company and regardless of the state of your current AppSec program today, I hope it will be useful anyways. If you don't have an AppSec program today, don't be ashamed, but doing something is better than doing nothing. My name is Per, and I work as an AppSec advisor here at Visma. We are a large software provider of accounting, payroll, ERP, and other financial software. We are one big company, but we consist of many smaller companies, about 200 plus autonomous companies or teams spread across many countries across the Nordic region, Benelux, Central and Eastern Europe, but also some presence in UK and South America. And this does complicate a few things when running a large-scale centralized security program like we do. I work in the security team, but before that I worked as a developer, both as a front-end and back-end developer. And to be a real hacker, I also teach lockpicking. This is something we actually teach our managers here at the company, because we teach our developers how to do actual hacking of web applications. So why shouldn't the managers also be allowed to have some fun? This is also a very good exercise when it comes to highlighting that the skills itself isn't illegal, at least not in most countries. And learning the tools and the techniques can really be an eye-opener when it comes to how hacking works in real life. But what if I told you that your AppSec program really isn't about AppSec at all? I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking like, well, just listen to the name. AppSec, it surely has to be about application security, with focus on the application. And this is where I think we sometimes take it too literal, just like we do with software in general. We take the software for granted, but we miss on a crucial part, that the software doesn't write itself. Not yet. What I'm talking about here is you. What we have learned during our journey is that our AppSec program is actually just as much, if not more, about you, the people, and so many more things. It's about the developers, but also the architects, the designers, the testers, the business analysts, the managers, the marketing team, legal, HR, finance, and even your customers. And every other role and person I forgot. It's also the soft things like existing culture and mindset. It's the organizational structure. So it's about your company. It's about the humans, and it's about layers, and building these security layers across the organization and hope that as little as possible will slip through. And when it does, there is someone to catch you. So we already know that the human factor is by far the most common cause of any breach and vulnerabilities. Just like a basic human error, you're getting tricked into providing your credentials in a phishing attack, or the lack of knowledge on how to configure something securely, or if you just happen to have a bad day and make an error in the code. We're all just humans. But it could also be if you have a tight schedule, which means that maybe you and your team compromises on a few things, for example, security, and prioritize it lower. Or that the organization is unaware of the potential impact that the lack of a security culture could have on the business, and therefore decided not to invest anything or not enough on security. Security also tends to be one of the first things to be down prioritized, because it works anyways. And it's easy to see it as something that maybe eventually, if we are unlucky, it could happen. So it's much harder to see a direct return on investment and measure it for security if we compare it to, let's say, a feature or a performance increasement that are almost immediately measurable in seconds, dollars, or user happiness. And some of you are probably saying like whoa, AppSec just got 10 times more complicated and expensive. And yes, that's probably an accurate assessment. Of course, we didn't came to this conclusion on day one either, and we didn't implement it on such a scale either. And to be honest, I wouldn't even recommend anyone starting a massive AppSec program like that if you have little or nothing today. You have to expand it and build it out over the years, just like we started out very small with a single business unit to a single division, and then to cover several, all by testing things along the way to prove the value and without being a pain in the butt for our developers or the rest of the teams too much. And we have since increased both our responsibilities and our team's responsibilities, our development team's responsibilities when it comes to security. And we have also increased the coverage of the security program over the years. But we're still falling short on a few areas, and I will talk about those shortly. But first, let's take a few steps back and define what I mean when I talk about an AppSec program. So this isn't something that we've come up with. This is a commonly used name or term for a set of processes and activities that you can add in the normal software development lifecycle to identify, fix, and prevent security-related issues and risks. A security program would also often define KPIs and acceptable levels of security. For example, how many critical vulnerabilities and for how long they can exist before escalated in the organization for the risk either to be mitigated or accepted. But it can also be to classify your applications into different tiers, because a critical issue in an application with many customers, a lot of sensitive data, is of course more important than an application with a critical issue in an internal system with no sensitive data and no customer data, and only, let's say, a handful of users. So this should help it to make it easier to prioritize, because security isn't always black and white. The security team should also provide knowledge and tools, or at least recommended tools necessary for the organization to be able to make a good decision themselves when it comes to security. And this is often also related to the work or to the use of DevOps principles, with a focus on shared ownership, shared responsibility, workflow automation, and rapid feedback. It also assumes that other security things, such as network security, physical security, like your PC or the office, and other security domains are addressed elsewhere, but it's normally not covered in an AppSec program. And finally, an AppSec program is often managed by a security team. Here you can see one basic example of how an AppSec program can be implemented, and you see the different security mechanisms that you can cover in each part of the normal software development lifecycle. You have the normal SDLCs on top, like governance, design, implementation, verification, and operations. And here you add a few different security mechanisms along the way. But when we initially started our program many years ago, it was a very small program. I wouldn't say it wasn't even a security program at that time. It was a special interest group with some developers in one or some of the teams, a manager, and a single pen tester that we had hired. They proved to be useful, and we slowly grew it from there. We got some more pen testers, we got some more people from the development and operations joined in, including me. Now I really had a team to build something around. And it was at this point that we actually became a proper security team, but still for only a smaller part of the organization. And while we often talk about pushing left or shifting left, so adding security as early as possible in the development phase to avoid unnecessary costs, one interesting note here was that we started from the rightmost side with pen testers, something that is normally done very late in the development phase, even after you have deployed and released your application. But if you think about it, starting from the end and moving backwards actually makes a lot of sense, because that means that you can actually cover all of the areas. And apparently, after talking with other security teams and companies, this seems to be a common practice actually, because the pen testers can work independently without disturbing the development teams too much, or at least very little. When they are done, they can provide a very good report to the development teams, including suggested remediations, and it is in the development team's context. And context here is key, because the pen testers are internal. So they know a lot about how our organization work. They have access to internal documentation, even source code and other internal tools. So their reports are often much better than what you can get from, let's say, an external pen test report, and much better than that could ever provide, because they lack the company context and insight that we get internally. So for our development teams, it means that they will get only a few high-quality findings, or at least hopefully only a few. But the number should at least be very low compared to automated tools, which is often more to the left side of, or middle or of the left side of the SDLC. But in my opinion, we can actually provide here very low false positive rates, only really high quality reports. Things such as theoretical issues are removed, and that means that it's really high quality findings with step-to-step instructions on how to reproduce and remediation guides that we can provide to our development teams. So let's say that the report ends up with 10, 20 issues, and maybe half of them are critical or high. This number is actually a manageable number to get down to 0. And you can really see as a developer, when you are fixing this issue, you see the number go down to 0. But if you would have used an automated tools, the number of issues could easily have been thousands of reports. This isn't uncommon at all if it is the first time you use an automated tool. And even if you would fix 100 issues or several hundreds of issues, it's still not going to show, and there is literally no light at the end of the tunnel. So the developer will basically give up on security already. So do you see the difference here with the two approaches, starting with tools versus started with pen tests? At the same time, the security team can also start to build a relationship and trust with the development teams or teams. And they can start to understand their processes and pain points. So when it was time for us to scale out or build out our security program, we already had an established name and trust in the organization. This meant that it was much easier to get organizational-wide support higher up in the organization than if we would have started something huge on day one. And then when we started to build it out, we also took a more scientific approach by looking at available material and research and existing models, like the open and freely available information by OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project, which was the model I showed previously. But we also took a look at other existing programs run by other companies that have openly shared their experiences. So I guess the lesson learned here is don't get too hooked on theoretical models, because in a complex organism such as an organization, they may not fit or may not fit very well. So instead look at other companies as well. But at the same time, we also took a more personal approach by collecting personal experiences, having interviews and discussions, and observing our developers and development teams to see what they wanted and not from a security program. And we still do this up until today. Every other year, we conduct a larger scale of interviews where we interview our developers to identify gaps in the security program, but also changes in the organization or the threat landscape, so we can improve or make things even more efficient. This will also highlight the things that we do well today, so we can continue on doing that. It also helps us to keep up to date with the changing technologies that our teams are using and new threats that arise. We do the interviews and the analysis of the results together with a independent research institute. And this is both to contribute to the research field, and there are several white papers, books, and videos where we are cited. But we also did it mainly to take out us from the equation. So if the security team would have asked a developer if the security team is doing well, there is a risk that the developer will not give their honest opinion. And by using this third party, we hopefully would reduce that risk. So our findings was that we found a few areas of concern that wouldn't fit our organizational structure or culture based on the existing models that we found and how we wanted to run our security program. We also found, of course, a lot of things that we liked and how we also would like to run our program. But often in the models, the security teams were above the development teams in the organization and power structure. So it created frictions and slowdowns in a more and more rapid development approach that our development teams had. And we also found that normally the security team had to review and approve changes, a oftenly painfully slow process. And when the report came back, it was often non-relevant issues or theoretical issues only. They provided no recommendations on how to solve the issues, and it basically just created more work for developers. We did not want it to be that kind of security team. We also found that existing programs were often based around compliance or compliance-driven with some out-of-date regulatory framework or focused too heavy on a certain area like operations only, how to configure a web server, and often way too specific and with way too many hard requirements. In our organization, we have, as I mentioned, hundreds of teams that provide different types of software. They are hosted differently to different types of customers in different countries. So a one-size-fits-all program would be practically be impossible for us with hard requirements. The hard requirements would, of course, also take away from the responsibility and ownership of the developers and the development teams, kind of like before DevOps, and security were still living in the past here. So we needed to improve here, and we looked how DevOps actually was implemented in our organization, how to build trust and give responsibility and power back to the team, and therefore also gain organizational support and trust in an organic way. But we also found that there was several culture issues, mainly when it comes to secrecy, a word that is almost synonymous, or at least very strongly associated with security. Think about PDF reports that no one reads, or perhaps the CISO, incidents that are either covered up or at least trying to hush up, never to be spoken again. And this culture of silence has created a lot of harm, I believe, to the industry, minimizing the issue and preventing people to share their experiences, fearing that they would get yelled at or things like that because they have done a mistake, even though we're all humans and we all make mistakes. And this culture of silence really needs to stop now. But let's take a closer look at the different areas and some of the actions we also came up with, some follow-up actions. So if we start with security team authority, it's important to note that the security team does not create any direct value, only indirect value. So we're no knights in shining armor here to fix everything and make everyone safe, even though I do know that this is a common misconception in many security teams. And I understand also that giving away power is a scary thing. But it is the development teams and their people that does the hard work, and they create the products that you can sell to customer and in the end make money. So we therefore need to understand how the dev team work and the external pressure points that they are facing from customers, managers, time, complexity, and the impact different things have. We in the security team, we are merely facilitators here to support the development teams to make the right decisions and help them with friction points like convincing a manager or offloading them of unnecessary tasks, like finding suitable tools and instead provide them with some recommendations of tools. But not only stop there. We also take centralized costs for any tools, so money shouldn't be an issue when it comes to security. On top of that, we also add expertise on how to use and how to configure these tools to give maximal value and efficiency. In a large organization, this is also where it makes sense to centralize both tools, money, and competency. We also need to understand that we need to collaborate with the developers because with the DevOps principles, the developers want to deliver secure and safe software. But we need to be there to support them when it comes to management, when it comes to prioritization, budget, authority, even hiring the right people in the team. So security is way much more than just a technical problem. We also found that the security team needs to stop being naysayers and fearmongers and instead being a little bit more pragmatic. So if we keep on sounding the alarms every time there is a new security hole or a CVE released, or there is like a very rare or complex attack or a theoretical attack only, the people will stop listening to the security team and stop to take the security team seriously. And in the end, they will just not listen to us. And what is the use of a security team then? Well, nothing. The security team cannot do anything without the development team support. Let's move on when it comes to compliance and certification. So we all do know that we should keep our systems up to date. We should follow best practices. We don't need a paper telling us that. Instead, we need to understand why the things that we do is ignored, why things are being ignored. And if we can't measure it with automation, for example, is it really secure? Like if we have a piece of paper that says, well, it was secure 3 years ago, is it still secure today? No one knows, but likely not. And that's why automation is really key for us. So, of course, there are still various reasons where we do have to follow different compliance frameworks, but we try to focus less on what we call paper security and more on actionable and measurable security, preferably by automation and also continuously testing this. And this often means that if you continuously test with automation different security mechanisms, you often also meet the compliance that the compliance requirements would have anyways, or often even better. So just like Ronald Reagan said, "Deverai no proverai," trust but verify. We need to trust the developers. They are really, really smart and they want to create secure software. So we shouldn't be too much in the way, but instead help them to achieve this goal of being secure. When it comes to the global shortage of security professionals, working in security often requires that you do have some kind of higher education, like a university degree with a relevant program, but it often also requires some work experience and sometimes even unreasonable requirements, like a junior position that requires a certain security certificate, but that security certificate requires that you have worked in the industry for 5 years. I mean, that's impossible. A junior position shouldn't have those certifications or requirements. And if you're really looking for someone with those certifications, you're actually looking for a senior position, which requires a senior salary. And we as an industry, that includes recruiters, we can do much better than that. We're not helping ourselves by creating these hard requirements. And by the way, do you know who already got a higher education, have a few years of work experience, knows techs, and are often willing to learn new things? That's right, developers, and other closely related professions like infrastructure engineers, architects, testers. So we need more developers to do the same journey as we did, to work with the security team, with the developers. But you don't always need full company support when it comes to creating a security program. Of course, if long term you do need full or at least a larger company support, because security does cost a lot of money, but you can get away relatively cheap in the beginning. Like we started with a special interest group and a pen tester, but you can get away even cheaper by, for example, allowing a single developer or a few developers a percentage of their time to be spent exclusively on security, and give them their ownership, give them the resources, and give them the responsibility for security, and take it from there. Many companies also have something like internal skills trainings with associated budgets, and these can also be used for security as well. Thanks to GDPR and other recent and upcoming legislations, and also several high-profile hacks in recent years, we already have at least most companies' board members' attention when it comes to security. But there could still be some resistance when it comes to middle management, or even lower down in the organizations, with people that don't like changes, or at least from what we have found. But the good news is that you don't need their support to start, at least not to start small. And eventually, if everything goes well, they will also follow. But scaling security, both when it comes to more teams, more companies, and more roles, have been and remains our biggest and hardest issue right now. Changing culture and mindset does take years. And with secrecy, I mentioned mindset here, and secrecy, I believe, is also here a mindset when it comes to security. Keeping quiet isn't a solution, and the industry have tried this for many years. However, transparency, I believe, does seem to work. And by transparency, I mean on many different levels, like the security team towards the development teams, but also the development team to the security team, development team to development team, but also from the organizational view. The security team needs to be aware of where the rest of the organization are going, so they cannot freeze out or isolate the security team. The security team need to be well informed about high-level directions and goal, and be part of the organization. And this, of course, also goes towards your customers. You need to be transparent towards your customers, and you can use this as a sales argument, actually. And same when you report findings. It needs to be transparent. Don't hide the findings. Be transparent about it. Let other teams in the organizations learn from the findings. We need to stop living in the past and basically change our mindset. So let's conclude. I'm not going to pretend that everything we did was perfect, because it wasn't, and it wasn't a straight path either. And many of the things that we have done are mostly applicable to a large or medium-sized organization, because for a smaller organization, the overhead would likely be too large to run a security program like we do. I would also like to take a moment to emphasize that there are many things that we did that was based on research. But other things have basically been also a big experiment where we have learned and tried different things along the way. Some have been successful and some have been less successful. And it does take a long time to change the mindset. This can take anything from years or several years actually, regardless of the size of a company. And security is much more than a human problem. It's not only a tools problem. It's about a culture. And we need to be more transparent and open with security. Security is a shared responsibility, and we can only do this together. So thank you for listening, and take care and stay safe.